The human race may have only decades to survive, and it's up to a ragtag team of diplomats to avert subterfuge and chaos in the human division. Hey everybody, TMW here, and thank you for joining me. That is the book I'm going to be reviewing on this episode of SFF180. Wink is not here. She's off doing Wink things, probably eating or napping or trolling the dogs or doing whatever she likes to do. I don't make her be on the show if she doesn't want to. So it's just you and me today. Let's talk a little bit about John Scalzi. Now, this is a writer who really needs no introduction. This has actually been his year, 2013. He won the Hugo, of course, for Red Shirts. And long before that, he had a string of extremely successful novels, including a really fantastic reboot of H. Beam Piper's Fuzzy series. And he's been a popular blogger on the internet for well over a decade. In fact, was one of the earliest prominent bloggers. Now, Red Shirts, I really enjoyed that book. I loved it, but in the spirit in which I think John wrote it, which was as a lark, as a laugh, as just a Valentine. It was like the ultimate piece of fan fiction. It was his love letter to all of the great and hilarious tropes that we all grew up watching on cheesy science fiction TV shows as kids. It was a terrific book, but I don't think it's the book that John deserved to win the Hugo for. I think that book is this one, The Human Division. This is an absolutely spectacular space opera adventure, and it's the culmination of so many themes that John has been spinning out and developing throughout the Old Man's War series. Now, this book is set in the Old Man's War universe, but it's not part of the original trilogy, or 4 books if you count Zoe's Tale. It comes after those stories in the timeline. You don't have to have read those books in order to enjoy and understand the Human Division, although having some familiarity with the universe, as always, does help. Now, we should start by talking a little bit about how the Human Division was published. Serialized novels are nothing new. They've been going on for centuries, I'm sure. I mean, Dickens was doing it. It was probably going on before Dickens, for all I know. But, and of course in science fiction, it's been going on for many, many years as well. But the way John did it was he structured the book specifically for e-publishing, taking advantages of this new emerging technology. Each chapter of the Human Division was released on, I think, a monthly, monthly, although it might have been bi-weekly, correct me if I'm wrong, basis as downloads, as individual downloads. And then when that was all done, the hardcover came out of the complete book. Now, what this meant was that John had to structure the novel in such a way to where each chapter worked as a self-contained narrative, but they all worked together at the same time as a cohesive whole. And he succeeds with absolute flying colors. This is clearly the best book in what has already been a long and very artistically and commercially successful career for him. Now, the Old Man's War universe is one in which humans coexist with species of thousands and thousands and thousands of alien races. Most of these alien races make up something called the Conclave, and this is in conflict with Earth and its colonies for precious resources, in other words, colonizable worlds. Now, at the end of the original Old Man's War trilogy, the protagonist of that trilogy revealed something about the way in which the colonial union, representing human colonies, was essentially using the Earth, the home world, in such a way that the Earth didn't really like. This led to a breakup in diplomacy between the Earth and its own colonies, and now the Conclave is courting Earth for membership. And this doesn't make the colonial union very happy. Now, Scalzi's heroes here are an underdog ragtag team of diplomats called the B-Team, because they get all the crappiest assignments out there in the galaxy, but they're really, really good at diffusing those. They're led by a CU lieutenant named Harry Wilson and his aide, Hart Schmidt. They go from planet to planet diffusing all these horrible, wretched situations that nobody else wants to deal with. And in the process of doing this, they discover plots. Somebody, we don't know if it's human or alien, is out there deliberately attempting to sabotage diplomatic efforts. They're stealing spaceships, they're stealing weaponry, they're deliberately setting up ambushes to make it look as if the CU is responsible when they're not. The more Wilson investigates, the less he knows, and the more it seems like all these terrorists are just 4 or 5 steps ahead. Now, one thing about the book that really sticks out is the fact that John Scalzi clearly has a great deal of respect for diplomats. He's a guy who's already interested in politics to a great degree anyway, and I think he just has this natural sort of sympathy for these people whose careers involve defusing situations that, if they go wrong, will lead to all-out war. What this book doesn't do is the kind of overt fourth wall breaking that John indulged in Red Shirts. It's a very straightforward piece of storytelling, but it does have a lot of his signature trademarks. It's got his humor, it's got his pathos, it has all those emotional marks in between. John is very, very good at doing that in ways that don't feel overly melodramatic, as if they're forcing themselves upon you. His stories earn their emotional reactions honestly, I think, simply because he draws you into the characters, and he does so many times with a nudge and a wink, so that when solemn events happen, they're not so overwhelmed by the pathos. It's because things are happening to people that you, and aliens, that you have really come to care about. He knows when to take his story seriously, he knows when to lighten up, he knows when to keep his focus on his protagonists, he knows when to give us a break from them and go a little bit afield to show us a little bit what's going on elsewhere in the galaxy with other characters whose stories, while their subplots, are still relevant. So despite the Hugo win for Red Shirts, I really do think that The Human Division is going to be the book by John Scalzi that people are still talking about and reading and seeing reprinted 25, 30 years from now. Like today, people are still talking about Neuromancer and Ender's Game and books like that. It really is an amazing story that brings to mind exactly what it was about science fiction and space opera that made all of us fall in love with the genre in the first place. It's optimistic science fiction, of which there is far too little these days, with all of us in a dystopia fervor. Because even though the situation in the story is potentially very bleak, what we're left with is this feeling that if humanity's going down, we're not going down without a fight, and we are going to do everything we can to survive, and we will persevere somehow because we have that kind of ingenuity. Science fiction used to deliver that kind of theme all the time, and it doesn't so much anymore. The Human Division is one of the rare books on my website to get a 5-star rating. I don't do that very often. I think over 700 reviews. I've only done that fewer than 24 times. So if you've been following John's career up to this point, you've probably already read this book. It's inconceivable that you haven't. But if you haven't read any Scalzi, go ahead, check out the first 3 volumes, 4 actually, because I think Zoe's Tale is also terrific, in the Old Man's War series, and then treat yourself to this one. What you will discover is an absolutely rousing series of stories that will bring you back to his books again and again and again. So anyway, that's all I have time for in this episode. Thank you very much for watching. Remember, these are reviews. You will not always agree, but if you enjoy watching, please leave a like. Really helps me out. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video with all of your friends. If you have any book review recommendations, please send me those via message. All the links, Amazon links, my text review links, all that kind of good stuff is in the About section below. And thank you once again. Until I see you next time, happy reading. Bye.